believe that people have intrinsic value. Where did we get that view? So now we're just starting to dip our toes in the water with theonomy, right? We're starting to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, I can believe this, but all this stuff, but why? I mean, we have to come up with a consistent form of, well, why would I say some of what I think the Lord's laws are and some of these others? Well, I don't see that as I don't see a consistent way to apply that. We either are submitted to God's ethos that he's established for us in scripture, or we're not. We're appealing to some other ethos. So like at some point you are appealing to an ethos. Like, cause he and I had a conversation about this, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. And in which case I was making a case for theonomy, and he was like, well, I think that we should have, he was talking about advocating for so long. And so, well, what standard are you applying to arrive there? Are you using God's standard? Or are you using a secular standard? Instead of using a secular standard. So that's not something I'm willing to do.
Sure.
I said, whenever I have a worldview, it's always through. Now, he recently has come out as a theonomist. He's like, I'm totally bought in. I've read the literature. I'm like, I get it.
So wait, hang on just a sec. When you say read the literature, and you also mentioned Bonson. So
yeah.
Bonson, what's it? By what standard? Is that the book that you're referring to?
Yeah. By what standard? I think, yeah, that's one of them.
$5 yes. On Kindle. Anyway, keep going.
Yes. By what standard?
Okay, keep going.
So there's not a way in which you can. So the whole point I'm getting at is if you look at the scope of scripture, there's not a theonomist. There's not a non-theonomist in sight. They all believe that the state should be submitted to their God, right? It was just a natural part of their society, right?
Which is interesting because when we think about like America, right? Like I'm more and more convinced that the God of America is self. In other words, like if you look at like all the laws that are currently being pushed, it's laws of like, well, what makes me feel good? What makes me feel nice? What makes me more comfortable? What makes me, it's all about self. And like,
yes,
the religion of America has become like who you are personally, like what, it's me. And I think it's become the religion of the church in some ways too. In America,
yeah.
That is.
Yeah, and the church is saying, well, we need to keep religion out of the pulpit, or it's like, or we need to keep the policy out of the pulpit, or we need to keep religion out of the state. I don't see a way in which.
Yeah, how could you ever do that?
Well, and the point of the founding fathers wasn't to keep religion out of the state; it was to keep state out of religion, and I think that. I think that we just become very confused on that issue. And I know that I was speaking with a girl about abortion the other day, and she was like, all this comes down to bodily autonomy. I said, great. Yeah, I agree with bodily autonomy, actually. And I said, but here's the thing. I agree with bodily autonomy because I believe there's a God who grants us certain human rights of our own body. And by that extension, I believe that bodily autonomy has been granted to the baby. And I also additionally believe that same standard I'm using means that mother has a relational responsibility to that child, whether or not, for whatever reason that baby came into existence, that mother has a responsibility for that child. I said, what is your standard that you're saying you have bodily autonomy as a fundamental human right? From where does that come? And she couldn't answer that. She's like, well, it's just true. It's like, it's not just a brute fact. You can't just say it's a brute fact. If you're an atheist and we're just bags of protoplasm, it's not just a brute fact that you just get to have a right to your own body. We're just animals floating in an ether, right? It's like, So anyways, when you really start thinking like, why do we believe, not just like why do we believe this? Like, how did we come to this conclusion? I cannot conceive of a society. I think that if we're going to advocate for public policy as Christians, and we should advocate for public policy because we should be advocating for justice and righteousness and things in the public square as it pertains to people. You can't do that without appealing to God in some regard. You just cannot do it. So I just doubled down and just realized, like, I'm not going to pretend that I'm appealing to some standard other than the one I know is true.